The air in the Chow Hall at Fort Bragg Special Warfare Center was thick with the smells of industrial-grade chili and overbrewed coffee, a scent familiar to generations of soldiers. It was a modern facility, all polished concrete floors and steel girders, but the underlying aroma was timeless. In a corner booth, away from the boisterous clusters of younger men, sat Arthur Newton. He was 84 years old, a frail-looking man with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes the color of a faded winter sky. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, his hands, though spotted with age, were steady as he lifted a cup of black coffee to his lips. He was on base for a follow-up appointment at Womack Army Medical Center, a routine checkup that was more a matter of bureaucratic necessity than medical need. He had outlived most of his doctors, and he suspected he would outlive this new one, too. Across the hall, Staff Sergeant Trent Rollins held court. He was 28, the apex predator of this particular ecosystem. A Delta Force operator, he was a perfect specimen of modern warfare, 6'2", carved from granite, with a casual arrogance that was as much a part of his uniform as the flag on his shoulder. He and his team, fresh from a grueling kill-house drill, were laughing loudly, their voices cutting through the low hum of the room. Rollins had a knack for finding a target, in or out of the training grounds. His eyes, sharp and dismissive, scanned the room and settled on the old man in the corner. "Check out Grandpa over there," Rollins said to his teammates, his voice a low drawl meant to carry. "Looks like he took a wrong turn at the nursing home and ended up in the land of the living." A few of his men chuckled, their eyes following his. They were young, strong, and at the peak of their careers, viewing the world through the narrow lens of their own invincibility. Old age was a distant, abstract concept, something that happened to other people. Arthur heard the comment but gave no sign. He had heard worse, from men who meant it with far more malice. He took another slow sip of his coffee, the bitter warmth a small comfort. He was simply waiting for the base shuttle to take him back to the visitor's lodge. He had learned long ago that the best way to deal with inconsequential noise was to treat it as such. Rollins, however, was not a man to be ignored. The old man's placid disinterest was a subtle challenge to his dominance of the social space. He saw it as disrespect. He and his team got up, trays in hand, and swaggered over to the recycling station near Arthur's booth. Rollins leaned against the wall, deliberately positioning himself to loom over the seated veteran. "Hey, Pops," Rollins began, his tone dripping with condescension. "You lost. This is a place for warriors, not a waiting room for the great beyond." Arthur slowly lowered his cup, his gaze lifting to meet the younger man's. His eyes were clear, steady, and held a depth that seemed to absorb the light in the room. "I'm where I need to be, son," he said, his voice a quiet rasp, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. The simple, calm response only fueled Rollins's arrogance. He was used to deference or confrontation, not this unnerving stillness. His eyes dropped, searching for a weakness, a target. They found it on Arthur's thin, wrinkled forearm, resting on the table. A faded tattoo, barely visible against his pale skin. It was a simple black spade, crudely rendered, with what looked like a small, blurred number 1 inside it. It was nothing like the intricate, full-sleeve tattoos favored by the men on his team. It looked cheap, old, like a prison marking. A smirk spread across Rollins's face. "Well, look at this," he said, pointing. "A little ink. You win a high-stakes bingo game, old-timer." His team laughed. One of them, a specialist named Diaz, chimed in. "Careful, Trent. He might have been a real card shark back in his day. Probably played with dinosaurs." Arthur's eyes flickered down to the tattoo, then back up to Rollins. "It's just an old mark," he said, his voice even. "From a long time ago." "Oh, I bet it was," Rollins sneered, leaning closer. "So what were you? A cook? Supply clerk? Bet you served up some mean powdered eggs back in the day." He was fishing, trying to get a rise, to prove that this old man was just that, an old man, irrelevant and out of place. He was performing for his audience, reinforcing his status as the alpha. He reached out and poked a finger at Arthur's arm, right next to the tattoo. "Come on, tell us a story. Don't be shy. Did you get this falling into a printing press?" The physical contact, as slight as it was a line crossed. For Arthur, the touch was a trigger, a key turning a lock deep within his memory. The smell of chili and coffee vanished, replaced instantly by the thick, cloying scent of jungle rot and gunpowder. He felt the phantom weight of a 60-pound rucksack on his back, the slick sweat under his collar, the humid air that was too thick to breathe. He tasted frozen dirt and cordite. He saw faces, young, taut with fear and adrenaline, their eyes wide in the oppressive darkness of a canopy so dense the moon never reached the floor. He felt the cold steel of a modified M2 carbine in his hands. The spade. They had all gotten one. A small, grim pact made with a needle and boot polish in a stinking, rain-soaked hole somewhere north of the 38th parallel, a place they were never officially supposed to be. It was a marker for a club no one wanted to join. The one was for the first team. His team. He was the only one left. The memory was not a story to be told, it was a ghost to be carried, a weight of names and promises that had followed him for 70 years. He blinked, and the chow hall swam back into focus. Rollins was still there, his face a mask of smug superiority. Arthur pulled his arm back slowly, his expression unchanged. "You should be careful who you touch, son," he said, the words carrying no threat, only a quiet, profound weariness. The exchange had not gone unnoticed. In a nearby booth, Captain Michael Evans was trying to eat his lunch in peace. A Green Beret, recently returned from a deployment, Evans was a student of history. He revered the lineage of the force he was a part of. He watched the scene unfolding with a growing sense of disgust. Rollins and his team were known for their arrogance, a trait often mistaken for confidence, but this was different. This was cruel. Evans didn't recognize the tattoo. It was too simple, too archaic. But he recognized something else. He saw the way Arthur Newton sat, perfectly still, his back straight but not rigid. He saw the absolute lack of fear or anger in the old man's eyes. It wasn't the passivity of a victim, it was the utter self-control of a man who had seen the worst of the world and was unimpressed by this petty display of machismo. It was a look of profound discipline Evans had only ever seen in faded photographs of men like Carlson, Merrill, and the quiet professionals of the OSS. Rollins, infuriated by the continued calm, decided to escalate. "What's your name, old man? I want to know who I'm talking to. Or did you forget that, too?" "Newton. Arthur Newton," the old man replied, his voice flat. That was enough for Captain Evans. He knew that name could be a key. He discreetly pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen under the table. He had a direct line to his mentor, the base commander, a man who, despite his rank, was approachable to his junior officers. He typed a quick, urgent message to Brigadier General Wallace. "Sir, apologies for the intrusion. Captain Evans here. There is an elderly gentleman named Arthur Newton being publicly harassed by Staff Sergeant Rollins and his team at the SFG Chow Hall. Sir, something about this feels profoundly wrong. The man's composure is unusual. Thought you should know." He hit send, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and apprehension. He had just gone over the heads of several layers of command, but his gut told him it was the right thing to do. 10 miles away, in a sterile, windowless conference room, Brigadier General James Wallace was enduring a mind-numbing briefing on quarterly budget allocations. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a specific buzz he had set for direct messages from his core group of officers. Annoyed at the interruption, he glanced at the screen. He read the message from Evans, his brow furrowing in irritation. Another case of his Delta boys getting too full of themselves. He was about to text back a curt, "handle it," when his eyes caught the name again. Arthur Newton. The name snagged in his mind like a fishhook. It wasn't a name he knew personally, but it was a name he had heard whispered. A ghost story. A legend told in hushed tones by old command sergeant majors over whiskey, a name associated with the very dawn of American special operations, a name that was supposed to be a myth. He felt a sudden, cold dread wash over him. "Excuse me, gentlemen," General Wallace said, standing abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent. "Something has come up. Colonel, you have the lead." He walked out of the room without another word, his aide scrambling to follow. "Get me Lieutenant Miller on the line, now," Wallace snapped as he strode down the hallway. His aide fumbled with his phone. A moment later, he handed it to the general. "Miller," a voice on the other end said. "This is Wallace. I need a service record search. Immediately. The name is Arthur Newton. NEWTON. I don't have a service number. Check the deep archives. I'm talking pre-Vietnam. Look for anything connected to CIC detachments in Korea. Project Bluebird. Anything and everything. This is a Code Alpha priority. You have 60 seconds, sir," the lieutenant stammered. "The digital archives for that era are spotty at best. A name-only search could take." "You have 50 seconds, Lieutenant," Wallace cut in, his voice like ice. The line went silent for a moment, save for the frantic clicking of a keyboard. Lieutenant Miller, sitting in a secure records vault, felt a sweat break out on his forehead. A Code Alpha request from the base commander himself was unheard of. He typed the name into the standard database. Nothing. He tried phonetic spellings. Nothing. He followed the general's instinct and switched to the secure server, the one that housed the ghost files, scanned, often classified records from the Cold War. He typed in the name. One file appeared. A single, heavily redacted PDF. The file designation was a string of blacked-out blocks. He clicked it open. The first page was a grainy, black-and-white photograph of a young man, no older than 20. He had a hard, angular face and eyes that looked ancient, filled with a chilling emptiness. On his forearm, clearly visible, was a simple, hand-poked spade tattoo. Miller's breath caught in his throat. He scrolled down. The redactions were everywhere, entire paragraphs, missions, and unit designations obliterated by black ink. But what wasn't redacted made him shoot to his feet, the phone nearly slipping from his grasp. Decorations: Distinguished Service Cross with oak leaf cluster. Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device and 4 oak leaf clusters. Purple Heart with 6 oak leaf clusters. And then, at the bottom of the list, 2 words that made the air leave his lungs. Medal of Honor. The citation below it was almost entirely blacked out, except for a few haunting phrases: alone and surrounded, held the pass for 72 hours, actions far above and beyond the call of duty, at a location we can neither confirm nor deny, sir. Miller's voice was a choked whisper. General, my God, sir. You need to get to the SFG Chow Hall. Now, what did you find, Lieutenant? Wallace demanded, his voice tight with anticipation. Sir. I found a ghost, that was all the confirmation General Wallace needed. Get my vehicle. Now, he barked to his aide. Tell Colonel Vance to meet me there. And get MPs to lock that building down. No one in or out. And no sirens. We go in quiet. Back in the Chow Hall, the tension had ratcheted up. Rollins, emboldened by Arthur's silence, felt he was winning. He saw the old man's quietness not as control, but as the weakness of senility. What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue, he taunted. Can't remember any of your big war stories? Or maybe there aren't any. Maybe you spent the whole time peeling potatoes in Kansas. Is that what this tattoo is for? King of the potato peelers. The quiet dignity of Arthur Newton was beginning to fray, not with anger, but with a deep, encroaching sorrow. A sorrow for the boy in front of him, who wore the uniform of a warrior but understood so little of the cost. A sorrow for the faces in his memory, who had died in mud and blood for this boy's right to be so arrogant, so ignorant. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady, cutting through the jeers. "That mark," he said, looking Rollins directly in the eye, "cost more than you could ever imagine." The simple gravity of the statement silenced the room for a heartbeat. But for Rollins, it was the final insult. A challenge from a nobody. "Is that so?" he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. "You know what I think? I think you're a fraud. Some old man who likes to hang around soldiers to feel important. I think you bought that tattoo at a flea market." It was at that precise moment that the main doors to the Chow Hall swung open. A pair of uniformed military police officers entered first, their expressions grim, and took up positions on either side of the entrance. The laughter and chatter in the room died instantly, replaced by a confused, anxious silence. Every soldier in the room, from the newest private to the most seasoned operator, instinctively straightened up. Then, Brigadier General James Wallace strode into the room. He was a tall, imposing man whose presence commanded immediate respect. Flanking him was a full-bird colonel. The general's eyes, like chips of blue ice, swept the room once, dismissing everyone until they landed on the scene in the corner. He saw Staff Sergeant Rollins, puffed up and sneering. And he saw the small, frail old man seated at the table. Rollins froze. His face, flushed with arrogant confidence a moment before, drained of all color. It was a cataclysmic shift in his reality. The sight of the base commander, in person, in the Chow Hall, was so far outside the realm of normal that his brain couldn't immediately process it. His mouth hung slightly open. General Wallace's stride never faltered. He walked with a purpose that seemed to part the very air in front of him. He ignored Rollins completely, his gaze fixed solely on Arthur Newton. He marched directly to the table and came to a dead stop, his polished boots clicking smartly on the concrete floor. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his expression one of profound, unadulterated awe. Then, with a motion so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air, he brought his right hand up to his brow in the most perfect salute he had ever rendered in his 30-year career. It was a salute of deep, almost worshipful reverence. "Mr. Newton," his voice boomed, echoing in the tomb-like silence of the hall. "It is an absolute honor to see you again, sir." Arthur looked up at the general, a flicker of recognition in his ancient eyes. He offered a small, tired nod. "General," he acknowledged quietly. Wallace held the salute for a full 3 seconds before lowering his arm. He then turned his head slowly, his icy gaze falling upon the petrified Staff Sergeant Rollins. The full weight of his command authority descended on the young operator like a physical blow. "Staff Sergeant," Wallace said, his voice dropping to a low, glacial calm that was far more terrifying than any shout. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Rollins stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. "Sir. We were just, talking to the gentleman, sir." "Talking?" Wallace repeated the word as if it were something vile. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into Rollins. He then turned to address the entire, silent room of soldiers. His voice rose again, filled with a cold, righteous fury. "All of you listen up," he commanded. "You think you are the tip of the spear. You think the things you do are new. You are wrong. You are walking in the footsteps of giants, of men whose sacrifices built the very ground you stand on." He gestured toward Arthur, who sat watching with a pained expression. "This man, Arthur Newton, is one of the founding fathers of what you all pretend to be. Before there was a Delta Force, before there was MACVSOG, before the Green Berets even had a name, there was a handful of men. They were sent into the darkest corners of the world with nothing but a knife, a radio, and their courage, to do the impossible. They were ghosts." The general paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "This man is a recipient of the Medal of Honor for actions taken during the Korean War that are, to this day, still considered too sensitive to fully declassify. He and his team held a strategic pass against an entire enemy division for 3 days, allowing for the safe withdrawal of thousands of American soldiers. He was the sole survivor. A collective gasp went through the room. The soldiers stared at Arthur, no longer seeing a frail old man, but something else entirely. A living monument. Wallace wasn't finished. He turned his full, wrathful attention back to Rollins. You mocked the mark on his arm. You called it a bingo prize. His voice dripped with contempt. You wear your fancy unit patches and your high-speed gear and you think you know what sacrifice is. You know nothing. With a deliberate motion, General Wallace unbuttoned the cuff of his own pristine service uniform. He slowly, methodically, rolled up his sleeve. There, on his own forearm, was the exact same tattoo, a faded, simple black spade. The shock in the room was a palpable, physical thing. Rollins stared at it, his mind refusing to comprehend what he was seeing. This mark, the general said, his voice a low growl, is a legacy. It is carried by a select few, in my position and others, as a tribute. A reminder. It is a symbol that honors the original teams, the men like Mr. Newton who wrote the first chapter of our book in their own blood. It is not a mark of service. It is the mark of a legend. And you, Staff Sergeant, just spat on it. Rollins looked as if he had been physically struck. His face was a mask of pure, abject horror and shame. He finally understood. The black hole of his own arrogance had opened up beneath him, and he was falling. The general was about to continue, to verbally flay the young man where he stood, but a gentle pressure on his arm stopped him. He looked down. Arthur Newton had risen slowly from his chair and placed a frail, steady hand on his uniformed sleeve. James, Arthur said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. That's enough. He turned his gaze to the utterly broken Staff Sergeant Rollins. He saw not an enemy, but a foolish child who needed a lesson, not a lashing. The boy is young, Arthur said, his voice filled with a weary sadness. He's strong, and he's proud. That's what we wanted, isn't it? For the generations after us to be strong and proud, to live in a country where they don't have to see the things we saw. He looked directly at Rollins, his faded blue eyes holding no malice, only a deep, profound wisdom. The tattoo doesn't make the man, son. The man makes the tattoo mean something. The uniform doesn't make the soldier gives the uniform honor. You are strong. Now learn to be wise. Pride is a good servant, but a terrible master. Remember that. The simple, powerful words of grace hung in the air, a lesson more devastating than any punishment the general could have devised. Rollins could only nod, tears of shame streaming down his face, unable to speak. General Wallace stared at Arthur, his own anger receding in the face of the old soldier's incredible dignity. He nodded slowly. As you say, sir. He then turned to Rollins and his team. You four. My office. 0900 tomorrow. You are relieved of your operational duties until further notice. He then offered his arm to Arthur. Sir, may I escort you to your appointment? Arthur gave a small smile. I'd like that, James. I'd like that very much. 6 months passed. Trent Rollins and his team did not go to the stockade. Their punishment was, as Arthur had hoped, educational. They were detailed to the JFK Special Warfare Museum. For 6 months, they cleaned display cases, polished brass plaques, and archived old photographs. Their primary duty was to lead tours for new recruits, telling the stories of the heroes whose history they had so arrogantly ignored. Trent, in particular, threw himself into the work. He spent his nights in the archives, reading declassified mission reports, learning the names and faces of the men who had come before him. The arrogance was burned out of him, replaced by a quiet, profound humility. One crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur Newton was back at the museum. He often came to sit and look at the exhibits, finding a strange peace among the ghosts of his past. He was standing before a black-and-white photograph of a group of young men in Korea, their faces grim, all of them bearing a fresh, dark spade tattoo on their arms. A young man in civilian clothes approached him hesitantly. It was Trent Rollins. He was leaner, his eyes clearer. The swagger was gone, replaced by a respectful stillness. "Mr. Newton," he said, his voice quiet, almost timid. Arthur turned, his eyes showing recognition. "Sergeant, it's just Trent, sir," he said. I just wanted to apologize. Properly. What I said that day, what I did, it was unforgivable. I've spent every day since then reading. Learning. About what you and your team did. The things you went through. I had no idea. I was ignorant. And arrogant. And I am so sorry." The apology was heartfelt, stripped of all pretense. Arthur looked at the young man for a long moment, then a small, tired smile touched his lips. He reached out and clapped Trent gently on the shoulder. "Everyone starts somewhere, son," he said. "Ignorance can be cured. The important thing isn't where you start. It's the path you choose from that moment on." He gestured with his head toward the photograph. "They were all just boys, you know. Just like you. Strong and proud. They'd be glad to know the legacy is in hands that are willing to learn." Trent Rollins could only nod, his throat thick with emotion. He finally understood. The greatest weapon a soldier ever had wasn't his rifle or his training, but his humility. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, a lesson given to him by a quiet legend in a chow hall. Arthur turned back to the photograph of his lost brothers, leaving the young man to his newfound wisdom, a silent torch passing from one generation of warrior to the next.